Hello and welcome to the Womb-Centered Healing Podcast. I'm Sama Morningstar and I have Chaitanya here with me. Thank you so much for joining us today. Chaitanya was talking about in one of our discussion forums in the Womb-Centered Healing Temple group, I believe, or maybe it was a different group that we're in. I think we're in a couple.
It was
of
that one.
Yeah. So she was talking about her healing process with prolapse, and it was very helpful what you were sharing with others that were asking about this. And so that's why I invited Chaitanya to join us in the podcast to share about your healing process. So thank you so much for agreeing to do so. And I would love to hear about it. And it sounds like it's also it's integrating with some of your previous healing modalities, and you're learning new healing modalities so you can support other women through the process of healing this sometimes very challenging and difficult condition that happens with women sometimes. So please share more about that. Introduce yourself more and share about this healing process that you've gone through.
Thank you, Sama. I'm really happy to be here sharing with you. I work with women around womb connection and womb healing, and I've come from a yoga background, very passionate yogini, really into the spiritual side of yoga, as well as the movement and movement as medicine as well, and all the practices of yoga as medicine. So I've been very deeply passionate about connecting with the womb, connecting with our cycles, and inspiring that in women all over the world. And I feel like it's a real time for that at the moment. The womb awareness is really, really gathering and building, so that's really exciting. So in my journey, I'd been working for a few years, working in the sense of really immersing and learning all that I could about the womb, all that I could about how I could use the yoga practices from all the different spectrum parts of yoga to help in connection and healing the womb through all phases of life. And I'm the kind of woman that likes to practice it all on myself and feel it all experientially, and really get a good understanding in my body and my soul about what I'm practicing and what the different people are talking about when they're sharing things like that. I felt like it was really my work in the world. I really feel like I've found my work in the world, which is a blessing. So I went and did a training so that I could be certified to teach yoga, particularly for women and women's health. So that was wonderful, and it touched on prolapse in there. It touched on all sorts of women's issues and cycle awareness, and I was already sort of deeply immersed in all of that, and I was going through a bit of a journey with fatigue. And so I had to use all the skills that I had in order to get through this big training and stay on top of my energy levels and be kind to myself. Shortly afterwards, I went up to Queensland, which is probably a 6 or 7 hour drive, with a friend of mine who was studying midwifery. And we went to this thing that we called womb school. And it was a really well-known midwife who practices outside of the medical system, and a woman who's a healer who does womb steaming and the special womb massage and these things. And so we had a circle of women over 2 days, and we talked all about the womb. We explored different techniques. We did yoni steaming. We did talked about posture and binding the womb, and the culmination of it all was really the self-exploration. So we had a group of women in the room, and we all had our fingers off our yonis, and we were all sort of feeling it out in our own space, but collectively as well. And then the two healers were walking around talking to each of us, saying, what are you feeling? You know, how's it all going in there? And
All right, there we are.
Okay, so we're all sitting around together, and we're all doing a bit of self-exploration. We've got our fingers in our yonis, in our own private space, but collectively in the room together. It was a very empowering moment. And the women healers were walking around and talking to us about what we're experiencing, what we're feeling. And I could feel that my cervix was dropping down really quite low, and it was kind of bulbous inside. And so when Jenny came over, I said to her, "Oh, Jenny, this is what I'm feeling like. Do you think that maybe is a prolapse?" And she said, yeah. Like, she asked me about it. She said, "Yeah, that's probably a prolapse. Like, just talk to your cervix, have a little feel of it, ask it to pull up and keep working with it. That's totally fine, and you can work with this, And so, of course, I was like a little bit shaken on the inside. I was like, oh my God, something's going on inside my yoni. And being so passionate about womb connection, it was a little bit of a shock that I hadn't realized that already. So, from there, I went home and I started to notice more of the sensations that are commonly associated with prolapse. So that you'll hear people say about the dragging sensation. So yeah, you actually feel like your womb is dragging down, like there's a pulling down right in the pelvic floor. And I'd been doing a lot of yoga and some vigorous exercise where I was pumping my chest energy and getting the chest chi moving in my chest a lot. And I was doing lots of squats and things like that, which you hear are so great for your womb. And so I started feeling like when I was doing these different parts of my exercises and my practice, as well as at other times in my life, I could really feel that pressure coming down on the pelvic floor. So I started to be really acutely aware of the different things that I was doing were affecting these prolapsing sensations. Okay, so that was sort of, I'm sort of working out what's going on and how what I'm doing is affecting my body, and very interesting. So straight away I stopped doing my sit-ups, I stopped doing the pumping energy, which was pushing down onto the pelvic floor. I stopped doing the deep squats and substituted them for more like a chair pose. So you've got your legs together and you're squatting down. It doesn't put that pressure down on the pelvic floor. And I started doing a lot of things like squeezing bricks between my legs. So you can use a big fat book. I was using Shantaram at the time. So I got Shantaram squeezing that between my legs. Classic.
If no one's read Shantaram, you've got to read Shantaram.
Yeah. You've got to read it. It's an amazing book. And the sequel is just as good and just as fat. So, it's a second yoga brick. But really starting to use the little bit that I'd learnt in my trainings to start like focusing in on the pelvic floor. So as well as tightening and strengthening those inner thigh muscles, really doing a lot of inversions, not when I was bleeding, because that's when the energy likes to go downwards and I like to leave it that way, but at all other times of the cycle, spending a lot of time doing restorative inversions, putting my bum, like I'm sitting on the couch now facing the camera, I would turn around so that I was facing the back of the couch and then put my feet up here on the wall and slowly just drop my upper shoulders down off onto the floor. So it's kind of like a shoulder stand, but I'm on the couch being supported. Maybe put a cushion on the floor. So be careful when you try it because, it's a bit wonky getting down off the couch. Yeah. But like that, yeah. So putting your bottom up in the air, like I call it putting your womb on a pedestal. Yeah. And so really elevating that womb because that helps the womb to drop down again into a more regular place where it's biologically, physiologically regular. Right. Oh wow, it's such a big journey, but the results were really fast, actually, in a way. Like the initial results were really fast with doing a lot of inversions, working on contracting the pelvic floor muscles. And I like to do the anus and then the cervix, sort of vagina, and then like around the clitoris too. Like I think like the 3 centers down there, doing different routines of sort of gentle to medium contractions, and really getting that pelvic floor really able to open and able to close as well. It was really, really important in the healing too. And interestingly, to me, because I'm very interested in using yoga therapeutically, and I dabble a little bit in Ayurveda because I've had a history with doing traditional Indian massage, and so I have a bit of a fascination with that. It's like each of the channels of the body, for instance, the digestive system, they have like an opening at both ends. So, well, the digestive system has the mouth and then it has the anus, of course. And so there's power in those openings, and there's a connection that can be made energetically if you work with those openings. So when you're doing contractions of your anus, you're actually sending energy all through the digestive system on an energetic, physiological level, and same with the yoni. So if we're working, it could even be subtle contractions. It doesn't have to be like, you don't want to really tighten all the time. But there is some tightening sometimes needed if you are prolapsing or if you do have incontinence and things like that. You can check out for yourself by just checking in the muscles, inserting a finger or two and squeezing around the fingers with your yoni, and just exploring if you are able to release and contract in different ways. And yeah, if you are weak down there, then it might be helpful to do a little bit of that. But even if you're not weak, even just little stimulations of the yoni, that's a power point that sends energy all through our reproductive system. So when we're connecting with that energetically, it's like pressing that powerful button that's switching on the whole system and sending a flood of energy through that whole system. So that deep sort of connection is known in the ancient cultures, to be a really powerful healing force, connecting with the different power points, the different sacred sites of the body. So that was definitely a big part of the healing journey. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I wanted to ask a little bit more about some of the things that you said. You were talking about exercising the pelvic floor and the different sites of, contracting the anus and the yoni, clitoral area. And you mentioned that it's important that it can let go all the way too. And you mentioned the importance of that strength if there's any incontinence, as well as prolapse. Now, for myself, incontinence seems to be an inherited trait, even though I haven't had any babies, which is often what starts it off for women, is the loosening of those. But I have a feeling, though, too, that there's 2 other aspects to incontinence, and I wanted to run it by you and see if it also could be part of the prolapse thing. Because, the assumption is that the incontinence is a weakness in the muscle there. But it can also be caused by chronic tension in the muscle that puts a kink in the bladder or in the urethra that traps urine that then comes out with a sneeze or something. A chronic tension in one muscle is what's the cause of the weakness, or, like pulling and opening too strong over here. And so that learning to relax the pelvic floor muscles allows the one that's responsible for holding the urine in to fully activate. But trying to strengthen that one, it's so hard to isolate them, that if you're trying to strengthen just the urethral muscle, but this other muscle that's hyper tense isn't letting go to allow that, then you're just strengthening that already hypertense muscle even more and exacerbating it. So just tightening those muscles without the emphasis as well on the full relaxation. And so you said that putting the fingers in and feeling the strength of your muscles, I would say also feel for any sore or tender spots with a little bit of self massage, because that often, right? And that's often what can be indicative if you have a hypertense muscle, just like anywhere else on your body, that eventually gets so tired it's kind of sore and painful because it's been holding on to something for a while. And so there's that aspect of it too. And I imagine that you have some experience with that. There's another aspect I wanted to mention, which is inflammation. So I've also encountered this idea that, are you familiar with the urethral sponge? It's a spongy organ around the female urethra that swells up with fluids and creates the G-spot in the vaginal canal. That the G-spot is the one surface of this whole sponge that can swell quite a lot, and that's the organ that produces female ejaculate, which can be quite copious. So I'm imagining it can swell quite a bit, filling up with fluid with arousal, and then it squeezes upon orgasm to let this fluid out, which is a very healthy functioning of the female body, because it cleanses the urethra and prevents bladder infections. And so, but it can also become inflamed because it's hungry for certain nutrients that we don't always get. My dentist was telling me this. He was saying that prostate inflammation, and that causes urinary difficulties in men, and then this inflammation of their urethral sponge can cause, again, a kink or something off with the urethra, so that causes incontinence. And he said eating certain foods, and sure enough, it definitely had an effect on that for me as well, eating those foods to really keep that organ well nourished, and no, that organ doesn't even exist in most anatomy books. But anyway, so I wanted to put those two aspects, that the relaxation is just as important, and releasing any traumatic memory in the tissue as well, and what your experience of that is, as well as a kind of nutritional anti-inflammatory approach to some of that too.
Great, thank you for sharing that. It's such close quarters in the pelvis and inside the body. There's not a lot of room. But if one thing gets tight, then that's pulling on something else. Or if there's a big there, then that's pushing something that way. There's everything is packed right in, and the fascia is connecting everything, and everything knows what the other things are feeling, and it's all very close. So the way to start to self-manage these things is to get right in there, like you said, get right in there, be in a safe space with yourself, really explore internally and feel into all those different places, feel into the tension, breathe into the tension. There's this beautiful pelvic therapist called Isa Herrera, and she says, imagine your yoni opening like a flower, just imagine, make sure you're doing those releases and not just contracting. That it may be very important to build strength in the muscles if you're having a prolapse, if the muscles are wide open and maybe your posture's bad, so the force is coming down and the organs are just free falling, they're just victims of the bad force in the body. But you may need to release some chronic tension first before you can strengthen. And in order to know that, you can internally investigate. You can get, if you have a partner or a really close friend who's up for that, you can get a little bit of hands-on therapy and just feel around, just breathe. If you find a spot, try and use that gentle focused awareness to really breathe into that, and see what happens next. See how you feel after that, see what comes up. see what emotions arise, and do your best to be with them, or to talk it through with a therapist, or whatever you need. We all usually know what our limit of dealing is, but yeah, it's very close quarters, and like I said before, those close quarters are affected immensely by the energy points on the body. And so gentle energy work and healing, even if it's just putting your hands over your pelvis or over your pubic bone, where there's a beautiful power point there that connects. I think that would connect in with what you were saying with the tissue around the urethra, and helping to calm the energies there, because it's all connected, but there are these sacred power spots all over the body that we can connect into, and they get disturbed, they get all flustered, and they hold this nervous, flustery energy and this disturbance, and they also get dirty like a plug in the shower. They get sort of gungy on there, and when you bring your awareness there, if you do some massage of your belly, you help to clean away that gunk so that the energy can then flow really clearly and smoothly through. So I'm thinking that with respect to inflammation, and the inflammation in the pelvic area, it really speaks to me of heat and yang and go, or, that holding of some sort of old pain, those hot emotions and different things. And, maybe it's ancestral, maybe it's not even yours, maybe it's collective. It all reveals itself at the right time if you're ready to engage with it. I mean, it'll still be revealing itself even if you're not engaging with it, but you can catch it if you engage with it. But certainly cooling, with respect to incontinence and that sort of hot problems that people have with cystitis and things, and other chronic tensions. Look at your lifestyle, look at how am I being inflamed in my daily life. How am I taking time to cool down? Am I walking and watching the sunset every day, or am I keeping on with the go and never stopping? Because with these chronic problems, or any health problems that show in the body, it's really important to really put that self-care at the top of the list. And the top of the list of the self-care is, rest when you need to. Particularly when you're bleeding. So traditionally
I was just going to say that it seems like for you that was quite a process, because with all of your yoga and everything to discover this, what was going on for you, and having to it wasn't so much a matter of establishing a self-care practice. It was more of a matter of, wait a second, there's some adjustments that need to be made, because possibly you weren't aware that some of these practices and ways that you thought you were caring for yourself were actually not as beneficial as you thought they were. At least, they might have been beneficial for one part of you, but not for another part of you. And so then, that sometimes we have even people with well-established self-care practices. I've had that where I've run into that, saying, wow, my yoga is not alleviating my back pain anymore. Wow, my yoga is actually contributing to my back pain at this point. What does that mean? That means I have to change my approach, and I have to learn something new, and I have to, look at what I thought was the greatest thing in the world now with a little bit more of a discernment, and say, wait a second, I'm learning more about it. So I'm curious to hear about your process with that, with discovering this about your practice, and what new things that you discovered. Probably some of the very things you were just sharing with me about, that you discovered for yourself. I'd love to hear about that.
Okay, so really important things that I discovered through this journey are that the prolapse can often be related to digestive weakness. Okay, so I was living at the time with a Chinese doctor who's a very close friend of mine. And when I came home from womb school with his girlfriend, we said, "Oh my God, I've got a prolapse, Benny," you know, and he said, "Oh, well, you're spleen deficient. It doesn't surprise me," you know, so it was that obvious to him. And so that was a bit of a revelation, because the digestive energy in the Chinese medicine thought really holds and uplifts everything in the body. So it holds the body up and holds it all together. And when you have a digestive weakness, which I've been working on for a while to heal mine, it just doesn't hold. So your organs can drop out. And so I kept working with my diet, and I take herbs to try and move towards more and more health in my digestive system. But I realized that during my period, my digestive power goes down, which is a natural thing for women, because our energy is sequestered to help do the bleeding, to help get this huge physiological marvel to happen. And so I already knew that my digestive power was low, but I started to realize that that's when I would really have that sinking feeling. I had to be really careful to really rest, like double time resting for Chaitanya in her periods. I already had a really beautiful yoga nidra practice, which I love, and it really supported me through healing from chronic fatigue. So I was at the end of the end of the fatigue journey then. So yeah, I did a lot more yoga nidra. As I came out of my bleeding time of the cycle and into the building, what I call the building time, because that's when we build blood, I noticed that I was still weak then. I couldn't push my exercises then, and I learnt that I shouldn't push personally my exercises then, because I was just recovering. I was recovering strength and recovering digestive power, which recovers my body's ability to hold itself together in a really stable and supported way. So I learnt to slowly move back into my daily practice. So I like to give my daily practice a bit of a rest during my cycle, maybe just do some movements to help get the energy flowing. And then, more restorative focus in the building time, or the follicular time, I think they call it. And yeah, like I said before, to make sure that if I was doing anything like a goddess stance or like a horse wide squat sort of thing, to make sure that I'm giving a little bit of hold, I'm giving a little bit of a pelvic contraction to support myself there, and just experimenting to see what my body could handle, to try and move towards healing as a whole woman, you know, all in the same direction, like not some of me going that way and some of me going that way. I investigated a lot about which poses, which asanas tone the different ligaments that hold the uterus. And so I started to incorporate more things like, I think they call like a wide-legged, your legs are sort of, if you stood at the front of your yoga mat, if you imagine you had a yoga mat and you took your right foot back so that you've got sort of like a triangle you're making with your legs, and then you bend forward. So that's sort of pulling up on the pelvic ligaments and stretching different ones. So there's different poses I can use to tonify those ligaments. I started to get, to think back to my trainings and to think about all the different ligaments in the womb. And that was a really interesting thing, because I remembered that I'd done some kinesiology training with this really amazing teacher locally. He's a bit of a master kinesiologist, and he taught us like the greatest hits of kinesiology. So what make the greatest effect, how to get people down off their adrenals, how to get people out of shock, how to do this, or, you know, how to cleanse the lymphatics in one swoop. And we'd done these ligament resets. So I was thinking, wow, so my womb is dropping down. I've got a bit of laxity somewhere in there, because wombs just don't fall out, you know, there's something is helping it fall out. So I started connecting to my ligaments. I did like a little visualization. I'm sort of breathing into the different ligaments, and I'm thinking, wow, there's like, whoo, there's stuff going on in there, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So connecting with those ligaments. Then a friend, you know, synchronously, a friend came over who lived just across the laneway, and she took the kinesiology further than I did, and she has a young child. And her child had her first period and had a bleed that didn't stop, so a really intense bleed. And she was like, "Oh my God, get on the table. We're gonna look into this, because I've got to get my daughter to stop bleeding." And I hope she doesn't mind me sharing this, but I feel that she would be fine with it, in the spirit of the community that we're sharing with. And I think it's very important. And what she deduced with her kinesiology awareness and skills was that it was something from the grandmother, and it was some unresolved trauma in the grandmother that was then playing out in the granddaughter and making this momentous bleed that, you know, was going on and on. And they healed it on the table. Yeah. So really felt into the different emotions and all that different stuff. And that got my friend Julianne really interested in working with the womb and menstrual disorders and things, just locally with the few people that come and see her. And she told me that she'd done a little bit of practice and experimentation around resetting the ligaments of the uterus.
With the kinesiology. Okay.
No way.
Yeah.
I'd never heard anyone do this before, but I'd done ligament resets on all different parts of the body. It does depend on the person who's having the healing to be down, not on their adrenals. Yeah, so not all raised up and yang yang yang, and, you know, like not up on your adrenals. You have to help the person come down off their adrenals, and if they're chronically like that, that could take a little while, you know, that could be a healing journey of its own. Mm-hmm. But because the ligaments have some sort of relation with the adrenal system. Yep. So if your adrenals are getting taxed in a big way, then that really weakens your ligaments and leaves you open to ligament damage. And you'll find these people, you know, you might see them at the coffee shop coming in on crutches, you know, because they've hurt their ankle or something, but they still need their coffee, because they're in such a cycle of living life from those adrenal reserves and really depleting themselves like that.
I was just talking with one of my massage clients yesterday about this. Mm-hmm. She came in limping with sciatic pain, and I started asking her about, you know, her history and how it got there, and because she'd been telling me she's been having it going on for a long time and nothing has helped her. And so I was looking at, you know, how can I help fill in the gaps for her? And we talked about coffee, we talked about the adrenals, we talked about the kidneys. You know, I mean, there's points in the back right there. Mm-hmm. Most people are really sore right there at the base of the rib cage in the back, close to the spine. Those are the adrenal points. And, you know, she asked me, I didn't even have to say anything about coffee, because she told me that she reduced her coffee as part of her healing process to just 1 cup a day instead of 3 or 4. And then as we're talking, she says, how do you feel about coffee? And I told her about dandelion root coffee, which is called Crohn's coffee, that actually replenishes the nutrients that the coffee strips from us, and actually helps the liver to cleanse the toxins from the coffee, and is very tonifying for the whole system. And she's like, oh, yeah, it's delicious. And that's what she said. Oh yeah, I love dandelion coffee, you know, and she hadn't heard it called Crohn's coffee, but it's I love to share about it. You get roasted dandelion roots, and chicory is also a good one for that as well. I'll add chicory root in my coffee. And so, but we were just talking about this connection between the kidneys and the ligaments, and I'm quite familiar with this too. So you found that in order to have this ligament reset, you had to get to a state of adrenal relaxation, like that we're not pumping out excess amounts of cortisol anymore. We're not doing that. We're in
because
a
if you're not in that relaxed adrenal state, you can do the reset, but it'll never hold. It just, adrenal sort of steal it away, throw it in the bin, and then ask for more coffee. So so what you do with people who are chronically adrenally stressed, if you can help them step down off their adrenals, and if they're willing to drop off the coffee, you get them to drink a lot of orange juice or take high dose vitamin C, because that really nourishes what the process of living on the adrenals takes out of the body, and then that helps the other healing stuff to hold. So what Julianne did on that day, and I'd asked her to come over for some different reason, but she came over and she put me on the table, and she did ligament resets on the ligaments that go from the womb to the front of the pelvis and the womb to the back of the pelvis. And how she did that was really interesting. She rolled up a little beach towel, because we live at the beach, and put that under my tailbone and into my lower back. So I was lying down onto this rolled up towel, and then opened my legs like butterfly pose, like Baddha Konasana, which is just like a prime womb pose. So my lower back, if that's my lower back at the base of my hands, is sort of resting on top of the towel, and my knees are folded open, and that gives the ligaments at the back of my womb a rest. They're not pulling tight, they're actually resting, flopping sort of on either side. This is an imaginary description, but like flopping on either side of the beach towel, having a lie down. The front ones are getting stretched, but the back ones get to have a rest. And at that time, she holds my head, or I hold my head, and that helps me to process the emotion that's connected with the malfunctioning of those ligaments. And we hold it for about 5 minutes. And so just resting on the table, just breathing in a really quiet spot, and then the ligaments start to get their integrity back, and you can sort of feel it come through the body. And I'm so excited. And then after that, we took a minute, have a glass of water and have a chat. And then we did the front ones. So with the front ones, I wasn't lying on the beach towel. I was just lying flat on the table with my face up. And then she put her hands on the front of my hips, sort of like if I held you on the side of your hips, and you're lying up, she would move her hands up a little bit. So she's just getting the top of the front of the hip bones and push them together. So you're getting an internal rotation of the thighs. So she pushed and held my thighs so that they were rolling forward together. And that gives the front ligaments a rest, and the front ligaments get to rest while the back ones are having a little stretch now, but they're happy because they've just had a healing. And then we held that for 5 minutes, and she held my head, and I breathed, and we tuned in, and that gives those ligaments just a rest and a chance to just let go of the trauma that they've been holding, or that whatever it is that's stopping them from having their integrity.
Well, just wait a second. Does she have 4 hands? Was she holding your hips and your head at the same time?
I must have been holding my head, and she was holding my hip.
I was going to say, how is she doing both of those things?
Good point. But no, she was holding my hips, and I was holding my head. So and then afterwards, I could just feel the upliftment of my womb. Like, there wasn't like a sensation of dragging. It's like everybody's on board. We're all working together. We're all holding up. And then so I was like, oh my God, I'm healed, and I could just feel like my womb felt so good. And, that what I've just described is something that you can do at home. Anybody who's listening, you can try that at home. You can visualize, like you can look up, Google your pelvis, Google the womb and the different ligaments, or the ones that hold the bladder, or the ones that hold the rectum, and feel into all of those and try and deduce, like try and find out, is there a weak link in there? How can I lie or sit or move in a way into a position where that place can have a rest,
Mm-hmm.
and get somebody to help you if you need help, and then hold your head,
Mm-hmm.
and just breathe. Keep your eyes open, because you want to keep your eyes open to what's going on. Yeah, you don't want to like hide from anything. You want to keep it all open.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, don't drink your coffee. Don't eat chocolate.
Well, you need to start.
Stay away from
Not drink,
that. Yeah,
right?
have an orange.
Start with
Go. Yeah. Because I made that mistake, and I'm not even a coffee drinker. I drink decaf. I drink a decaf mocha, so it's got chocolate. It's got like a downgraded caffeine in it. Maybe a week later or something, I drank a decaf, and then there it goes. There's the dragging sensation. Yeah. So, coffee, that's a whole nother podcast. But yeah, like coffee and ligament damage.
But we're not going to do the one against chocolate. We're not going to do the podcast about not eating chocolate. Right? We're not going there.
It's important. Yeah, it's important if you do have prolapse, that you do realize that things like chocolate, maybe go for carob. Find a really good carob bar, because you don't want to compromise that integrity of your womb. And for anybody who's listening to this podcast, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of people listening who have never encountered prolapse, it's a terrible feeling. Like, it's psychological. It feels really bad. It's like you have this tangible sinking sensation, like your womb's going to drop out, and that's a bad feeling. It's like, oh my God, my womb's falling out. Can't talk to anyone about this. It's like hella taboo. Don't want to see a doctor because don't really trust that they're going to know what to do. Don't really just, all of that sort of stuff. And it's like, you can't hold yourself together. It's like a big failure sort of feeling too. It's like you feel like the core part of you is just not working, and it's not nice. So you want to do everything that you can, and that's powerful enough to make you skip chocolate.
Sure, right.
To try not to drink your coffee and stuff. And sometimes your addictions are more powerful than your will to heal that. Maybe your awareness just isn't really clear on what's necessary, but you live and you learn to back off on those substances if you're feeling weak down there. So that was a really interesting part of the journey for me. Yeah,
I bet. And what's fascinating to me in your description of all the different things that helped is that when you started out, you were talking about this strengthening process of squeezing the lower muscles to start,
which is really, really important. Yeah.
Right? Because that's sort of the first place you go of like, well, what's supporting it from below? And right, let's hold it in, right? But it turns out what you discovered is that the source of the prolapse wasn't necessarily, that was definitely important to, let's start with first things first, right? Let's make sure it's not really going to fall all the way out. And then what it sounds like you discovered is that there was this laxity in the things up above, or in the front and the back, the ligaments that normally hold the womb in its proper place. And it's very easy to see how women in pregnancy, when there's a prolapse that's happening after childbirth, there could be an overemphasis on the first part that you talked about, because gosh, the cervix had to be stretched all the way out, and it came through, the baby came through the vaginal canal. There could have been an overstretching of an over opening of the down below the pelvic floor. So everybody wants to strengthen and tonify that, which is great. But the same thing is happening in these ligaments in the abdomen with, they got all stretched out, particularly the forward one, right? And so it's lovely to hear all of that and the kinesiology of it, because, there's ancient traditions of belly binding and wrapping that sounds very much like what your kinesiologist friend was doing with your hips to reset the ligaments. And that helps
in
me
a way,
understand why that rebozo wrapping or hip tying, why that does that. It's a lot easier, I can tell you, as a massage therapist, sitting there and holding your hips together for
it's
5
a good
minutes.
job.
No, but if I can have a rebozo and tie it up and you know, bring the bones together so that they're not straining, you know, so it's not, so that the ligaments can reset, like you say, now that makes a lot of sense why that rebozo is so helpful, because then the ligaments get a rest, they gather in their, you know, the nourishment that may be right there waiting for them, but when they're pulled at their tightest and stretched out, they can't absorb anything, right? They can't absorb. Whereas when you let them be shortened, they can absorb the blood and the nourishment and the healing juices that are ready to heal them right there. Our bodies are
just the same as us. Yeah, it's just the same as us. You know, when we're pulled and we're stretched, we can't receive that nourishment and we can't receive that healing. But if we do a yoga nidra and get some super deep rest, then we feel like a new woman, and the healing we can reach that really deep place of healing within ourselves. And it's really interesting, Summer, that we move now to the postpartum woman, because this is where there's a lot of prolapse stuff. There's a lot of postpartum prolapse. There's also a lot of around the menopausal prolapse. I'm a woman that hasn't had a child, and so there's also a lot of people who have prolapse without having a child earlier in life. I'm 42.
Well, that adrenal fatigue and burnout is one of the most common things with women right now, because we're taught not to honor our cycles of rest, right? We're taught to just go, like you were saying, and just drink more coffee to make you be able to do it, and eat more chocolate.
Yeah. So in the postpartum, it's really interesting because what was I going to say? I'll talk first about the rebozo, which I love the idea of binding. It's definitely, as we've talked about before, a traditional practice in the traditional cultures. And when I went to the little womb school gathering with the midwife and the healer, we did fahas and bound our belly, and I found that when I got back and they were saying it's great for prolapse, that it wasn't great for my body. It was putting a downward pressure into my womb. So you've got to look at the at your body and how your posture is. What are you doing in your daily life? It's okay to have like a little practice where you're doing 5 or 10 minutes of elevating your womb. And then you've got how many minutes of the rest of your day. So how are you acting in the rest of your day that is impacting your womb? So whether you're postpartum or any time in your life, I invite you to like look now at where you're sitting and how you're sitting. And are you slumping? Are you slumping into the couch? Are you uptight? Do you have a little curve in the lower back? When you have a little curve in the lower back, that means that the bulk of the pelvic organs get to rest on the plate of the bone of the pelvis. So there's different ways if we're commonly orientating our pelvis so that we're slumping, like when we're driving our cars and when we're sitting at work and different things like that. That chronic mispositioning of the pelvis just leaves you wide open to prolapse. So then if you're not able to hold your pelvic floor with integrity because you're positioning your tailbone in a different way, so the muscles aren't as supportive, and then the forces of the body are just all coming down through the womb and then kapow. So you've got this opening, you've got the womb hanging above it, or the different organs. Looking, that was another really important piece of the puzzle is how am I sitting, how am I standing. For women who love to wear high heels, probably don't do that if you're a woman or a man. Or anyone, whatever you're identifying as, look at the way that's tilting your body and look at the forces. Are your shoulders above your hips? Are your hips above the middle of your feet? Is the pressure of this huge body pushing down evenly, transferring through the hips and coming down into the ground? Or are you standing backwards, or are you standing forwards and the pressure is going through a different place? Maybe it's going through your knees, maybe it's going out the back of your bottom, you know, like there's lots of different ways that we stand, and a lot of it is coping mechanisms, you know, because we're holding all this chronic tension and things in our bodies. But start to look at it and start to be aware of that.
Right. And that's what a yoga practice, that's what a yoga practice can really help, how it helps people with, you know, chronic pain. And, you know, I mean, because we talked about the womb ligaments, but all the ligaments in the body are affected by our constant go adrenal fatigue and that depletion that happens from drinking all that coffee and staying on the go and staying in the fight and flight mode in our nervous system, right? Constantly. And
that derangement, that derangement of the nervous system, and which is felt, the words that come up is like flustered or agitated or disturbed. It's all this energy. Depleted, fatigued, strung out, all of that stuff that affects all of our body. It's the cause of nearly all illness, right? It's the cause of everything. And how do we calm that energy is really the question, and particularly to do with problems of the womb. It's like in the ancient scriptures of Ayurveda, it's like there's like, you know, one line introductory solution. It's like, if you've got any problems with your womb and your reproductive system, calm that flustery energy, full stop.
Right.
You know, calm that shit down. It's like, you've got to rest. You've got to, it's not just rest. Rest is a huge piece of the puzzle, especially when you're bleeding. If you've got anything going on in that womb, you've got to be resting when you're bleeding, because that's where you can access that deep healing and that deep nourishment. But you've also got to be nourishing your blood. You've got to be nourishing this flesh and bones body, because it needs all those beautiful nutrients. It needs that nourishment, and it might mean that you might have to go for, you know, red meat stews or something. You might have to reassess your value system. You might have to, take a break from something that you've been doing, or you might need to challenge yourself or find incredible ways of building blood if you're really strict vegan and you don't want to switch. But if there's anything going on with your digestive system, or if you're depleted, if you've got iron deficiency, if you've got heavy periods, if you've got light periods, you know, whatever's which way that it's wacky, you need that nourishment and you need that rest as the first point of call. You know, it's so multifaceted.
Wow. So it's great. We've talked about strengthening from below, strengthening from above, right? Lifting, all of it. We've talked about the emotional aspects of it. Well, we didn't go into too much detail about that, but you hinted at this ancestral stuff and the emotional, you know, and then we've talked about now nourishment. These could all be separate podcasts all on their own. So this is a lovely.
We talked about yoni massage too. Yoni massage.
Yoni massage from
like, tuning into the different parts of the pelvis and the postural alignment. We talked about being careful of coffee and looking after your adrenals.
Adrenals, my goodness.
I'm just going to check my list. We talked about being careful with. Because there's so much, like, and it's so precious to me, and I feel like we all need to know it, but we don't. It's like another huge piece of the puzzle is postpartum care, and that could be a whole podcast series, you know, and it would be, there'd be hundreds of women out there doing podcast series on postpartum care. But if you don't, let me put it like this: when you have your incredible baby in this mama earth shaking experience that blows you so far apart that you can bring that spirit of that new child and the body of that new child through your body, that creates a whole lot of that. Yeah. So a whole lot of that all through your system to the highest degree, and in your baby's system too. Your babies come from that warm, wet environment through that crazy passage of birth. You know, she or he's right there with you in all that experience, and into the dry atmosphere, you know, like whoo, you know, with all these lights and cameras or whatever, bells and whistles. And so both of you are like so flustered and so I wouldn't say deranged, but I wanted to say, you know, energetically. And that's why we have these thousands of year old traditions of calming and massaging and nourishing the mama, nourishing the baby, the confinement, the binding of the belly, because the belly is like the center of calming that energy. You know, put your hands on your belly, it's so calming. If you don't have some sort of postpartum practices that help you to bring that energy back into your body, to calm all those rattled energies, they're just naturally rattled and deranged. It's not like a wrong thing. It's a completely natural response of the body to such a remarkable event. If you don't calm that all down, and if you don't take that appropriate rest for weeks and weeks and weeks, you know, just feeding the baby and just being cared for. And I know, and I'm sorry that I know that so many women just don't even have that as an option. Okay, so I acknowledge that, and I wish you the absolute best. But that leaves you wide open for prolapse and problems after birth and in menopause when the check comes in from the rest of your life. So there's no avoiding the gaping hole that gets left when you don't address those shaken energies of the body. It might be a traumatic event, it could be the loss of a loved one, it could be anything. But if you don't give yourself and honor yourself with that time and space to heal in some way, in whichever way you can manage, then yeah, sad to say that the womb cops it. It's like there's a direct line to the womb with our health as women. And if we don't toe that line, if we don't look after, you know, all of those things that we talked about, it's not like, oh, I healed my prolapse because I put my bum up in the air and did some pelvic contractions. It's like we said, it's this. It's like a whole broad spectrum reanalysis of your life, and how you treat yourself, how you stand, how you breathe. We didn't even go into that. You know, that is a huge piece of the puzzle. If we're breathing in the top of the chest, the bottom of our body isn't getting that reflexive action. All the muscles aren't working together. When I exhale now, I wasn't like this at all. When I exhale all the way out, I can feel my pelvic floor lifting up and pulling up. And when I inhale, it drops down and opens like a flower. Yeah. If we're just breathing in the chest, or if we have diastasis, you know, and our belly is pulled wide apart after birth, the muscles on the sides of the body, they're pulling really tight and squeezing, putting downward pressure. It's like you open again, you know, there's all these different things. And it's like the poor old womb, she cops it every time. Yeah.
Well, and you know, unfortunately, oftentimes the solution will just cut it out, but it's like, you know,
huge.
It's not really removing the source of the problem, as we see that the womb is not the source, but oftentimes, but the one who suffers
victim
from all of this that we're heaping on ourselves without paying attention to our own well-being, our overall holistic well-being. So, wow. So we could literally take pieces of this podcast and have whole separate podcasts. I think we ought to do it.
I'm all for it.
So where we can address in more detail each of these, and you know, I'm hoping, I know you were talking about developing your offerings to support other women with this, and so if someone wants to get in touch with you about that, how might they do that?
Oh, thanks, Summer. Yeah, I'm very, very keen to move forward with my healing work now. I've sort of got the green light from the universe, which is really wonderful because it's my passion.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm combining sort of yogic practices, movement practices, and deep rest practices with the self-care, with the nourishing recipes, with that individualized help, as well as if they're here in person, we can do hands-on healing work. And yeah, I've done a lot of that in my time. Or there's things that I want to empower women to be able to look after themselves. You know, I want to help women to heal themselves. Mm-hmm. So if anybody wants to connect with me, you can find me online. My website is called wombtempleyoga.com. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's pretty straightforward. It's all lowercase, it's all one word. So Womb Temple Yoga, I'm on Facebook. I've got an Instagram account. So you can find me out there in the World Wide Web of wonderment. Yeah, yeah. And I welcome anybody to get in touch if you like to have an online consult and talk about what's going on for you. Because often all you need is a fresh perspective. We've got all these old stale perspectives. You know, I encountered some women recently and we were talking about, we were doing some pelvic floor exercises, like I said, with the anus and the vagina and stuff at a little festival nearby. And they said, oh, I thought you were meant to do them when you were doing the washing up. And the other one said, oh, no, I thought it was when you do the laundry. And I thought, oh, Jesus, you know, who told you this? Some male doctor in the 1950s or something? Like, no, put down the washing up, put down the dishes, you know, put down the baby. You need to lie down and do this. You don't need to stand up and have the weight of all your organs bearing down while you're trying to encourage strength there. You know? It's like we've got all of these scrambled ideas and all of these sort of outdated and God bless them, like misinformed sort of practices from Western medicine and things like that. It's all still pretty young and pretty new, and they don't really have all the pieces of the puzzle like the East. And you know, there's a lot of pieces out there, but yeah, in the East they knew a lot of that stuff.
And then
so yeah,
also the traditions, the European-based traditions and many indigenous traditions had this, but were violently oppressed. Yeah, the midwives have been severely, and we don't even. That's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing too. Right? Yeah, but definitely
the herbalists and the midwives. You know, the body.
All the indigenous people. Yeah, all the indigenous people know there's indigenous smoking of the womb practices here in Australia. Right. You know, smoking, steaming. Steaming is a wonderful help for women with prolapse if your body can tolerate the practice. Like my body just does not like it at all, and I totally appreciate how powerful a medicine it is, and I'd love to work with women in the future as I know more about it. But yeah, that's definitely one. If your womb loves a good steam and you've got a prolapse, just go for it. That's going to be healing too. But just try something out and see how you go. You know, be your own scientist. Yeah, but yeah, definitely call me up for a fresh perspective. We can have a chat about what's going on, and if you'd like to work on a more long-term basis, I'm open to that too. So, great. Yeah, thanks, Summer. It's been so wonderful.
Yeah, and likewise, if you're curious about the Womb-Centered Healing Temple, which this podcast is a production of, and it's a place where we're gathering together womb-centered healing practitioners like myself, like Chaitanya, to exchange ideas, to reassemble, to remember this ancient wisdom that has been lost, and we're picking up the threads of it again and reweaving how to care for ourselves as women, how to regenerate life on this planet in a new way, how to regenerate the essence of our species as humans so that we are a regenerative species instead of a self-destructive and destructive to everything around us as well. So I feel that the womb is at the center of this rebirth of our species as a regenerative, as a restorative species. And so we can start with our own selves, noticing, like we've been talking about, how our body is calling for regeneration and restoration. And all of the things we talk about today apply to that. And we're gathering together in the womb-centered healing temple to birth this and lift each other up together through the process. So join us on this podcast. Join us. You can come check out the website at wombcenteredhealing.com, and stay tuned, because I guarantee you we're gonna have another discussion about this coming up soon. So, all right. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. That's all for now. Until next time.